So during my time at Berkeley, which was long, as you heard, I was able to record ECOG from 8 patients. So it's not often that you get the coverage that you're interested in, and that you're able to have patients do the task that you want them to. So these 8 patients here had nice overall coverage over the areas that I was interested in. So here, each color represents the electrodes for a different patient, right? So the patient with the yellow electrodes had electrodes both here on the medial surface of the left hemisphere and on the lateral surface, right? So this was one really rare case that I was really interested in, because I really care about what regions around here do and what the left PFC does. And of course, the left temporal cortex. This patient didn't have all 3, but that's really rare. So since I'm interested in word retrieval, I had these patients do a task that manipulated word retrieval difficulty. So what the patient had to do is just name pictures. So all these pictures were presented one by one, and they just had to produce the name of the picture as fast and as quickly as they could. What was manipulated is the semantic relationship between the different pictures in the different blocks, right? So here on the top row, you see all the pictures are from the same semantic category, right? So they're all furniture items. Whereas on the bottom row, they're all from different semantic categories. And we know that reaction times and error rates are higher in the homogeneous blocks than the heterogeneous blocks in production, right? And we think that the reason for this effect, that is called the semantic interference effect, is linked to this activation of the semantically related entities that compete for selection. And this competition is increased in the homogeneous blocks compared to the heterogeneous blocks, right? So I wanted to track that effect in the brain to see where and where selection happened. And the behavioral results were as expected, more or less. So this semantic interference effect emerges across repetitions. So it's typical not to have it the first time you present pictures, but when pictures are repeated, that is when this interference effect emerges. So in the data that I'm going to show you, I only looked at these repetitions. I didn't look at the first presentation. Okay, and this is the activity that I talked about earlier, right? This is the high gamma activity. So if you look at this, this time frequency plot here, you can see this big burst of activity here that is basically a broadband activity, broadband response. That is what we call high gamma. And now actually we call it high frequency band response. We don't call it high gamma anymore because there's been a debate about whether or not high gamma was really an oscillation or a sum of oscillations, and we think that it's more a sum of oscillations. So that's why we call it high frequency band, but I didn't change my slide since then. So, so this is the high gamma response that we're going to talk about, and you can see it here on single trials, right? And this is in one of the electrodes that had a particularly nice high gamma response. So here you can see it really nicely here. That is not only time out to the response here, but it's also time out to the stimulus. It's really a nice electrode, so I'll talk about it again. So this property that it's present almost on each single try is really interesting because we can do single trial analysis based on it, right? Which we can't do with surface EEG. So in surface EEG, you need to average all your trials to be able to see something come out, right? But when you're directly on the surface of the brain, you don't need to do that, and that allows to do more fine-grained analysis. Right? That's what I tried to do. Also, high gamma has been shown to be strongly associated with the bold signal. So those of you who like fMRI will be happy to hear that. I'm sure. And I want to show you here with this video just how dynamic this signal is. So this is the high gamma activity unfolding over a patient. Over this patient is naming a picture, right? So now they're seeing a fixation cross. And you see this preparatory activity here. At 0, they're going to see the stimulus, right? here you have already a lot of motor and prefrontal activity that is coming online. And as we get closer to vocal onset, we'll have posterior STG activity come online because the patient is hearing himself speak. Right? So you can see how very dynamic and specific this activity is, right? It's not like you have a big blob of activity at on one part of the brain and then it moves to another, right? It's very specific and it's very dependent on where exactly you are. Okay. And so this is how I analyzed the signal, and there are many, many different ways to analyze ECOG data because it's so rich. So that took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to analyze it, and this is the way that I came up with in the end. So what I did is that I basically broke down the signal into five time windows, right? So I broke down the signal into 200 millisecond time windows between stimulus onset and 1,000 millisecond after stimulus onset. And then I did that also time locked to the response. And I took the average of the high gamma over these time windows per trial. Right? So I had one value per time window per trial, per electrode. And then I put all of these data into a big mixed effect analysis, where I controlled for the semantic context, repetition, the side of stimulus presentation. You may have noticed that the stimuli were on different sides. That was for another experiment that I did that I'm not going to talk about. And basically, I did that so that I could control whether or not the semantic context effect that I was interested in was really a semantic context effect or a repetition effect or other things. And also I controlled for whether or not it was specific to the subject I tested, so to the patient and to the trial. So I had random effects for both subjects and trials and random slopes for the parameters of interest. So that's how I analyzed my data. So I'm going to show you the results. I'm not going to spend too much time because really I want to emphasize the technique and I want to talk about stimulation afterwards. So I'll go quick on that, even though there are a lot of slides, so I can come back to that at the end. Right? So basically what these plots show is the high gamma activity per each electrode. It's not the high gamma activity, sorry, it's the effect of semantic context, the beta, the raw beta for the effect of semantic context per electrode on high gamma, right? And red dots correspond to the effect in the expected direction, so more activity for homogeneous blocks than heterogeneous blocks. And the blue dots correspond to the effect in the opposite direction. So what I call semantic priming, so more activity for heterogeneous than homogeneous blocks. Right? And basically what we can see, what I saw is that the red dots, the amount and the spread of the red dots here in the prefrontal cortex increases with time as we get further away from stimulus presentation. So it's as is, the prefrontal cortex gets more and more involved in resolving interference from competitors in word retrieval. Also in the temporal cortex, there is actually a switch of effects. So here initially there's more blue, there are more blue dots, and then that switches to having more semantic interference. So then I talk about that more. And if you look at this on this slide by slide, so these are the time windows broken down by slide so that you can see that progression, right? You can see that the effects really change a lot over time, right? So when high gamma or when the brain is dealing with semantic interference is really dependent, really variable, right, across time and space. And also, you can see the spread of these red dots are almost everywhere on the brain, right? So it's not like you have only the middle portion of the MTG, right, that I talked about earlier in yellow that is involved in this effect. This effect is much more widespread than we would have thought based on these meta-analyses.
Can I ask you, so if your response times are higher for the heterogeneous,
Yep.
for the homogeneous condition, right?
Yep.
wouldn't you expect there to be more red than blue dots at the
Well,
latencies?
It's true. Well, the blue dots, the presence of the blue dots is interesting in itself, I think, because in fact what you have typically in language perception in particular, but also in production in certain conditions, is a facilitation in homogeneous blocks. Right? So typically when you're perceiving a word and you just perceived a word that is of the same semantic category, you'll move faster. And this is what is called usually semantic priming. What happens in production is that, in fact, there are both effects. So you have first semantic priming, and then it's followed by semantic interference. But the sum of these effects is semantic interference on the reaction time. So at the end, you have longer reaction time for homogeneous than heterogeneous. But in fact, both effects are present, and you see that both effects are present in the brain. That would take longer, I guess, to explain. And then this is just showing how these effects evolve over time per group of structures. So I couldn't do the statistics based on each electrode because otherwise there would be way too many comparisons, right? So at some point you have to lose specificity, you have to lose this really nice spatial temporal resolution, unfortunately, because you need to be able to make statistics to say, things are significant or they're not, right? And so here I grouped the electrodes based on where they were in the prefrontal, in the frontal cortex and in the temporal cortex. So that's how I was able to make those statistics. And basically, we could see this switch, right, in the ITG, in the inferior temporal gyrus, of these two effects. This switch of direction of the effects came out as significant. But I'm not going to go into the details again because I know the emphasis is not on my results specifically, but on the techniques that I'm using. Okay? And this is the same thing, time lock to response onset, right? So here I just took the 0 as being vocal onset, and I did the same analysis, right? From minus 750 to plus 250. And what we could see is that now it was the opposite, right? So the earlier, before vocal onset, the wider the spread of these red dots of the interference effect. And here you see a slide by slide. And you can see this really nicely here on this plot, right? So this is again showing the interference effect, the positive bars, and the negative bars are the priming effect. And you can see that the interference effect decreases really dramatically after 350 milliseconds prior to vocal onset. So suggesting that the interference effect, or the competition is dealt with prior to that time, right? And afterwards, people are doing all these other things that people care about, like phonological encoding and articulatory programming. And the temporal lobe didn't have as clear effects as stimulus did. Okay, I'll just explain that, and I'll do fast. This is another thing that we can do with ECOG, is looking at how, just taking all the reaction times together, how do reaction time correlates with the amount of high gamma, so with high gamma and protein. And people have shown both type of effects, right? So negative and positive and negative correlations. And so I just wanted to look at that in my data because positive correlations between high gamma and RT have been shown in the frontal cortex in working memory tasks. So I wanted to see if that was also the case in this word retrieval paradigm. And in fact, this was also the case. So here the pink dots correspond to this positive correlation, and it was very similar to the semantic interference effect that I showed earlier. Right? So here, this plot shows you that these positive correlations were also maximal before 350 milliseconds prior to the onset. And then I won't bore you much longer with ECOG, but the last thing that I did, actually no, there are two more things. What I wanted to do is look at how these regions communicate to allow word retrieval. And of course, that's really tricky. All we can do basically is look at correlations. We can do fancy correlations, like phase coupling, phase amplitude coupling, etc. They're basically fancy correlations. What I did is very simple. I just looked at high gamma amplitude correlation between electrodes that showed a semantic interference. And in this one patient, who was the only one that I had who had both posterior temporal and prefrontal coverage and medial frontal coverage, I saw that there were positive correlations between the amount of high gamma there was in one trial, in one electrode in the PFC, versus one electrode in the ITG. And this was even more marked response locked, so there was even more positive correlation between the two. So suggesting that when there's more high gamma, or showing that when there's more high gamma in the posterior ITG, there is also more high gamma in the lateral PFC and also in the medial PFC. And there you can take it to say that maybe that suggests there is communication between these brain regions to help us retrieve words when we speak, right? That was my interpretation. And this is the conclusions, and I won't go fast on that. I just wanted to illustrate this functional connectivity metric, or functional connectivity metrics that I mentioned briefly and that you'll hear about very probably when Bob talks on Wednesday. And who has heard of phase amplitude coupling already? Oh, okay. So this is one metric, right, that has been used, and was the phase amplitude coupling was developed in our lab, in Bob Knight's lab, I think, by Ryan Conolti in one of the first papers. And basically, what this metric does is to allow to see how fast, fast oscillations here correlate with slower oscillations, right? So phase amplitude coupling suggests that when there is phase amplitude coupling, that means that there's more amplitude, that the amplitude of the high frequency oscillation is phase locked with the phase of the lower oscillation, right? So you see here in this example that the amplitude of this oscillation is bigger when you are in the peak of that oscillation, right? And the idea behind that is that this phase amplitude coupling allows populations of neurons to communicate across the brain, right? So locally you'd have phase amplitude coupling, so between a high frequency oscillation and a low frequency oscillation, and then the low frequency oscillation communicates with a population of neuron on the other side of the brain or in another brain region, also through phase correlation, right? So if there is, so the idea is that there will be phase coupling from, say, the prefrontal cortex with the posterior temporal cortex, and that will allow communication long distance. And then locally, there'll be phase amplitude coupling with the high gamma that happens locally, right? And this is the theory that was put forth by that guy in Germany. He's really well known. I'm blanking on his name. No. Oh. Never mind. No. Never mind. It's fine. Anyway, so he put forward that theory, that communication through coherence theory, right? And so in Bob Knight's lab and other labs, people have been looking at this cross-frequency coupling a lot, and I tried it on my data too. It's not that easy, right? Because it's very opaque. You kind of throw your data into a series of calculations that take a very long time. And then the computer will tell you, yes, there's frequency coupling here, and no, there's not. But it's not something you can see, right, very clearly on the raw data. So it's always, for me, I'm still learning about it. But it doesn't mean that it's not interesting. So here, what I saw is that in one of the electrodes that I cared about a lot, because it had a nice semantic interference effect, I saw there was nice cross